Well, once again, welcome to the Nelson Living Room. I kind of like these moments where it feels like we're just kind of sitting and talking together. Although the conversation is definitely one way like this, I like this opportunity to tell you what I think God is talking to us about. I want to thank Tim Shaner, our director of music, for singing that song during offertory today. I asked him to sing that one for me. It's a James Taylor song called "Home by Another Way." I asked him to sing it because it's Three Kings Sunday here. It's the end of the Christmas season. It's Epiphany. It's the day we remember the three wise men. Remember, I started this Christmas journey a couple weeks ago by bringing the box out and starting to pull this old nativity set that my mother painted years ago. And well, I put most of it away, but I kept the kings out. And so I asked Tim to sing that song for us today. It's called "Home by Another Way." And if you don't remember anything else today, remember that line. Because these three guys, we're about to find out we're not even sure there were three. But these guys, these magi, we're not even sure they were guys. But these seekers, after their encounter with Christ, decide to change direction and go home by another way. So thank you, Tim, for learning that song for me. It's a great tune and a great reminder of what this Three Kings Sunday, the end of this Christmas season, is all about. The invitation to go home by another way. I grew up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I come from. I actually didn't grow up there, but I want to tell you where my people come from. My people come from the farmlands of western Wisconsin. It's a magical land. It's a land flowing with milk and cheese. It is a land where the cows outnumber the people, and it's a land where we like both kinds of music, country and western. And it's where my people come from. I'm a descendant of farmers, families that worked the land for a living. All of my grandpas and my great uncles were farmers. I'm one generation off the farm. These are hardworking, salt of the earth farmers who milk cows and raise goats and bale hay in order to put food on their table. And all of my grandfathers and my uncles, my great uncles, they all had great farmer names. My grandfathers are Orville and Virgil, and my great uncles were Gurney. That's a real name, Uncle Gurney and Uncle Marv. And these were men whose hands were calloused and had dirt always under their fingernails, and no matter how much they washed their hands, they were never completely clean. My dad joined the Air Force out of high school and took the GI Bill to go to college, where he studied to become a social worker. And then he and my mother moved 2 hours away from western Wisconsin to the Northwoods, to the big city of Rhinelander, population 7,642. And we traveled back and forth the 2 hours between the big city of Rhinelander and the little country village of Birch Creek. And it's a creek, it's not a creek. Between Rhinelander and Birch Creek most of my life. So I want you to picture this mid-70s Buick sedan, my parents in the front seat, two young boys in the back, no car seats, no seat belts. It was the 70s. And we were energetic and anxious and rambunctious, and we fought and we touched and we squirmed, and the ride there was not always real enjoyable. My mother came up with this really cool plan to get us from Rhinelander to Lake Holcomb. She would start out the journey by buying one of those big 3-pound bags of peanut M&Ms. And for every town that we got to, little village we got to between Rhinelander and Birch Creek, she would reach in, and if we didn't fight between the towns, we would get a handful of peanut M&Ms. I don't have the books of the Bible memorized, but to this day, I can tell you the order of the little villages between Rhinelander and Birch Creek. Pennis, Prentice, Keenan, Catawba, Glen, Flora, Tony, Ladysmith, Lake Holcomb, Birch Creek. Pavlov was right. A little bit of stimulus and reward changes the world. I loved going to these family events, though, because I got to watch these old uncles and older uncles and grandfathers of mine, these farmers at these family gatherings, these parties that were held. And you know what these guys would sit around and talk about at these parties? They'd talk about routes. That's right, they'd talk about routes. How to get from one place to another. You want to start an argument between my grandfathers and my great uncles? Well, you walk up to that little circle where they're sitting at the party and you ask them a question. You don't ask them a question about politics or religion or money. No, if you wanted to start the most heated conversation, you'd walk up to this group of old farmers and you'd say, "Hey, Grandpa, what's the best way to get to Jim Falls from here?" To which Grandpa Orville would jump right in and say, "Well, that's easy. You just take County Road E over to Highway Z, and then you hit 64, and then you'll hit 178, and before you know it, you'll be right there in Jim Falls." To which my Grandpa Virgil would say, "Well, you could do that, but I suggest you take Highway Double C, and then you pick up M, and then you go through Cornell, and that'll get you to Jim Falls." To which my Uncle Gurney would remind us that County Road R was really the most scenic route to get there. And besides, if you took R, eventually you'd have to hit 112th Street, which would take you by the Windmill RV Park and Tavern. We didn't have bars in western Wisconsin. They were all called taverns. And then you could stop off for a soda pop or two. And that argument about the best way to get to Jim Falls would take over the rest of the event. How to get from one place to another. So we kind of get that way about routes, don't we? Pretty sure that our way to get somewhere is the best way to get somewhere. Maybe even the only way to get somewhere. Whether we're talking about religion, politics, money, human sexuality, food, music, sports, movies, television. I mean, get a bunch of Star Wars fans in the room together and ask them which episode is the best, and you might as well watch a bunch of old farmers argue about the best way to get to Jim Falls. And here's what I always found interesting about watching my uncles, my great uncles and grandfathers argue about routes. Is that all of their routes got them all to the same place anyway. That all of their routes worked. At the end of the day, it didn't matter which one of their routes you took. The route that you took got you to the exact same place. It got you to Jim Falls. And that's where you wanted to be going. That's where you needed to be. So I wonder this morning, why do we cling so much to the routes that we love and to the paths that we know? Well, that's why, isn't it? Because we know them. Often we were raised taking this route. It's the route our parents took. And so then I took it too. Sometimes you don't even realize that there's an alternative route. I didn't even know there were all these ways to get to Jim Falls. Because the route I've always taken, well, it's the route I've always taken. For me, marriage was one of the first moments when I had to realize that my route wasn't the only route. Our first year of marriage, our first Christmas. See, I grew up in a family that opened presents on Christmas Eve. I mean, that's how you do Christmas. Bridget grew up in a family where you opened your presents on Christmas Day. We had been happily married for 6 months. And here we were. How do you do Christmas? But the destination was the same, right? The goal was the same. The end was the same. Family, generosity, the joy in giving. So it didn't matter when Bridget convinced me to switch my route. And so we're at Christmas Day present opener. And guess what? It's good. It's really good. Marriage has this way of showing you that your route isn't the only route, because your spouse, your partner, they grew up where they had another way of doing things. Christmas presents, money, debt, children, household responsibilities, how you are to appropriately squeeze the toothpaste. Do you know Bridget has a whole manual on how you are supposed to squeeze the toothpaste? She actually doesn't. She's sitting behind the camera looking at me like... But all of these moments show us that our route, our way, well, it isn't the only way. So you may be asking yourself on this Three Kings Sunday, why are we spending all this time talking about routes? Well, that's the story of the three kings. A few things about these three characters in our story. First, they're probably not kings. And we really don't even know that there were three of them. The Bible isn't clear about that. And we're not even sure they were men. In the scripture you heard today, they're called magi. It's where the word magic came from. They were astronomers and stargazers and sign readers. They looked up and started to read the world around them. The scripture tells us that they saw a star in the sky and figured it was a sign that something important was happening. That maybe someone important was happening. So they headed out in search of what they heard or thought might be a new king. Scripture tells us that 3 gifts were given, and that's generally why we've come up with 3. The scripture tells us that they went in search of a king, so that's why we've assumed that they're kings, but really what they are is seekers and searchers, and there could have been a lot more of them. In fact, in conversation with my friend Phil Button this week, he reminded me that nobody would have traveled the deserts of Arabia alone with 3. There would have been dozens, if not 100 or more people traveling together for safety and protection. And there would have been men and women together. A reminder for all of us, no matter our age or our race or our background, we can all be seekers of this thing called Christ. Here's one of the things that my research this week reminded me. That in the ancient Jewish world, the idea that you would look to the stars to tell the future was strictly forbidden. It was taboo. In fact, it is written into the scripture that you shouldn't rely on fortune tellers, that was strictly off limits. So when the ancient Jews would have looked to the sky and saw that special star, they wouldn't have thought of it as any sort of a sign. But these outsiders had a different way. They had a different route, a different way of looking at things. Right here in the Christmas story, we are reminded that God uses different ways to communicate to different people. The miracle of Christ would not have been known to the outside of the Jewish world if God hadn't tried to communicate in a different way. In a way that the Jewish people to which Jesus was born into wouldn't have even recognized. A whole different route to knowing who God was in the world. It's interesting too, right? They take this journey to look for this Christ, and where do they go first? Scripture says they went to Jerusalem, and it was the wrong place. So why did they go to Jerusalem looking for a king? Because that's where you would go. If you're looking for somebody important, in our context, where would you go? Somebody powerful. You go to Washington, D.C. You'd go to Lansing. You'd go down to the city hall. But see, this new thing, this Christ, this Jesus, wouldn't be found where we expected him to be found. He was found in Bethlehem. And so they had to take a different path. And when they got there, they encountered a different way of being God. A different way of having power. A different way of saving the world. A different way to get to Jim Falls. And after having that moment of seeing the Christ, born in a manger, worshipped by shepherds, parented by humble, everyday, real people like Mary and Joseph, the scripture says they returned home in a different way, by a different route. Like Tim sang, they went home by a different way. That's what this whole Jesus encounter, this whole Christmas experience is about. When you encounter the Christ, you can't help but look at your life different. When you encounter Jesus, it's going to ask you to change the direction of your life. When you encounter this Jesus, it's going to invite you to try things you've never tried before. When you encounter this Jesus, it's going to expose the roads in your life that no longer get you to where you want to be. When you encounter Jesus, he's going to ask you to set down your hates, your prejudices, and your grudges. He's going to ask you to deal with your hurts and your hang-ups and your habits, the things that hurt you and hurt others. He's going to ask you to live differently and love differently. He's going to ask you to go home by another way. He's going to ask you to change directions. So let me ask you this morning. When is the last time you let Christ change the direction of your life? Let me ask you this morning. What road are you taking that no longer is going to get you where you want to be? Let me ask us this morning. What road are we taking that needs to change direction? Are we willing to go home by another way? Are we willing to consider there's another way to get to Jim Falls? Here's my confession this morning. I have to admit that this COVID reality has sometimes pinned me onto a road that, well, I no longer want to take. The COVID church, after coming back from being away, I felt like I just needed to wait for it to lift, wait for it to go away, wait for things to change, wait for things to get back to normal. But I encountered Christ again over these last weeks, over Christmas, through you, through these 9 new people who said, we don't want to wait. We can't wait. Help us get connected to your church now. So I'm ready to go home, do church, do life, but by a different way, by a different road. And so we no longer can wait to get people connected in ways that make love real and real friendships and give you these opportunities to make real differences in the world. We no longer can wait until we get back together to make the church more inclusive or to address the issues of racism and systemic issues in our community. We gotta lean into that now. And so I'm asking you to take a lesson from the 3 wise guys, the 3 magi, before we put them back in the box. And let's get together and go home by another way this season. Let's make home in another way this season. And so I want to invite you to begin to do that now. This Friday night and Saturday morning, we're going to be offering a retreat on Zoom. At first, I didn't want to do it because I thought I didn't like it, but we can't wait. Let's get together and hear how God is connecting us. 4 hours, 2 on Friday, 2 on Saturday. Let's get together and see where God is leading us, leading you. You can sign up for that on our website. Find a small group to get into, a class this January, 4 weeks on all kinds of great topics. And I believe in this season, we are going to look for new ways to get us connected so that everyone is known, loved, and cared for. And when we call upon you to help us do church in a new way, to create home by a new road, I hope you'll respond. Let's learn from these 3 wise men and from my farmer grandpas and great uncles that sometimes there's more than one way to get to the same place. And sometimes, after you've encountered Christ, you just got to find a new way to make life together happen. Hey, Merry Christmas. Please come along and join us. I'm glad we are on this journey together. Happy New Year. We made it. And I look forward to all the ways that God's going to lead us into our future. God bless you.